I never thought hiding in my own attic would save me from the biggest mistake of my life. But sometimes, the truth finds you in the most unexpected places. It was Thanksgiving 2019, and I had just turned 62. After 38 years of marriage to Richard, I thought I knew everything about my husband. We'd built a comfortable life together in Portland, Oregon. He was a successful financial advisor, and I'd spent my career as a high school English teacher before retiring 2 years earlier. Our daughter Jennifer was grown, married, and living in Boston with her own family. That November, we were hosting Thanksgiving at our home for the first time in 5 years. Jennifer couldn't make it this year, but Richard's younger brother Mark and his wife Denise were coming from Seattle with their 2 teenage sons. I'd spent days preparing everything perfectly. The house was spotless, the turkey was brining, and I'd even bought new linens for the guest room. Here's where you might think I'm crazy, but let me explain. Richard and I had this running joke throughout our marriage. We loved surprising each other. Not big things, just little moments of joy. I'd leave love notes in his briefcase. He'd come home early and cook dinner when I was exhausted. It was our thing, the glue that kept us playful even after decades together. That morning, I had this idea. What if I pretended to have a migraine and excused myself upstairs, then actually hid in the attic and came down later to surprise everyone during dinner? I could picture Richard's face lighting up, the same way it did on our first anniversary when I'd hidden behind the door and jumped out. It seemed silly, romantic, nostalgic. I wanted to remind him that even at our age, we could still have fun. Around 2 in the afternoon, everyone had arrived. The house smelled like sage and roasted vegetables. Mark's boys were already planted in front of the TV watching football. I helped Denise carry her famous sweet potato casserole into the kitchen. "Margaret, you look a bit pale," Denise said, touching my arm. "Are you feeling all right?" This was my cue. I touched my temple and winced slightly. "I think I'm getting one of my migraines. The light is starting to bother me." Richard immediately looked concerned. "Honey, why don't you go lie down? We can handle things down here." "Are you sure? I hate to leave you with everything." "Don't be silly," Mark chimed in. "We've got this. You go rest." I felt a twinge of guilt for the deception, but reminded myself it was all in good fun. I'd only be gone an hour, then I'd reappear refreshed and we'd all laugh about it. I went upstairs to our bedroom and made a show of closing the door. Then I quietly slipped out and climbed the narrow staircase to the attic. We used it mostly for storage, old furniture and boxes of Christmas decorations. There was a small vent in the floor that looked down into the living room, originally put there decades ago for air circulation. I discovered it years back when I was up there organizing. I settled myself on an old cushion near the vent, trying to get comfortable. From this angle, I could see part of the living room and hear everything clearly. The plan was to stay up here for an hour, let them all settle in, then make my grand reappearance. For the first 20 minutes, everything was exactly as you'd expect. I heard the muffled sounds of the football game, the clinking of glasses, laughter. Mark was telling some story about a disaster at his law firm, normal Thanksgiving sounds. Then Denise called up the stairs. "Richard, can you help me in the kitchen for a second?" I heard my husband's footsteps, the kitchen door swinging. Then Denise's voice, lower now, more serious. "Is she really asleep?" "Probably," Richard replied. "When Margaret gets a migraine, she's usually out for hours." "Good. We need to talk." My heart started beating faster. Something in Denise's tone had changed. This wasn't small talk anymore. "Mark's in the living room with the boys," Richard said. "What's wrong?" There was a pause. Then Denise spoke, and her words made my blood run cold. "Richard, we can't keep putting this off. We need to tell her about us." The world tilted. I gripped the edge of the floorboard, certain I'd misheard. "Not today," Richard said quickly. "For God's sake, Denise, it's Thanksgiving." "When, then? Next Christmas? Her birthday? There's never going to be a good time." Denise's voice was sharp, impatient. "I'm tired of sneaking around. I'm tired of lying to Mark. You think I like this?" Richard's voice rose slightly, then dropped to an urgent whisper. "I've been married to Margaret for 38 years. I can't just what? Leave her? You told me 6 months ago you were going to talk to her." "That was 6 months ago, Richard." I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. This couldn't be real. This was my husband, my Richard, the man who brought me coffee in bed every Sunday morning, the man who cried at our daughter's wedding. "It's complicated," Richard said, and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. "The house is in both our names, the retirement accounts. If I file for divorce, she gets half of everything. You know what that means for us? Us." There was an us, Richard and Denise, my husband and my sister-in-law. "So, what's your plan?" Denise asked. "Stay married to her forever while we meet at that hotel in Vancouver every other weekend. I want a real life with you. I want to wake up next to you. I want to travel without hiding." I know. Richard sounded pained. "I'm working on it. I've been talking to a lawyer, very quietly. There might be a way to structure things so we don't lose as much in the settlement." A lawyer. He'd been talking to a lawyer. Planning. Calculating how to leave me while keeping as much money as possible. "How much longer?" Denise pressed. "Give me until after the holidays. I promise, I'll talk to her in January. I'll tell her I want a separation. And you'll tell Mark?" "We'll tell Mark together. After I've talked to Margaret, we'll say it happened recently, that we fell in love after my marriage was already falling apart." Denise laughed bitterly. "You mean we'll lie about the timeline? Make it seem like we didn't start this affair while you were still pretending to be a happy husband. Do you have a better idea?" Richard snapped. They were quiet for a moment. I heard water running, dishes being moved. My hands were shaking so hard I had to clench them together. "I love you," Denise finally said, softer now. "I just want to be with you without all this secrecy." "I love you too, and we will be together, I promise. Just give me a few more months to handle this right." I heard them kiss. Actually heard it. The small sound of lips meeting, intimate and familiar. A sound that should have been mine. "We should get back before Mark gets suspicious," Richard said. Their footsteps retreated. The kitchen door swung again. And I was left alone in the attic, my entire world crumbling around me. I don't know how long I sat there. It could have been 5 minutes or 50. My mind was racing, trying to process everything I'd heard. 38 years. We'd been married for 38 years. I'd given him my youth, my trust, my entire adult life. And he'd been planning to leave me, calculating asset division with lawyers, kissing my sister-in-law in our kitchen. Slowly, through the shock and horror, something else emerged. A cold, clear anger. If I confronted them now, it would be chaos. Denials, excuses, manipulation. Richard was a financial advisor. He knew how to spin narratives, how to make people believe what he wanted them to believe. And without proof, it would be my word against theirs. But I had heard everything. Every word. Every damning detail. My phone was in my pocket. I'd brought it up without thinking, just habit. My hands were still shaking as I pulled it out, but I managed to open the voice recorder app. It was 4:15 in the afternoon. I needed them to talk again. I waited. Below me, the Thanksgiving gathering continued. Football commentary, the boys arguing about something, Mark laughing at his own joke. All so normal, so oblivious. Around 5:30, Denise went upstairs. I heard the guest room door close. A few minutes later, Richard excused himself, saying he was going to check on me. I held my breath. The attic stairs were right next to our bedroom. If he actually came into our room, if he found the bed empty, but he didn't. His footsteps stopped at our bedroom door. I heard it open, then close softly. He waited maybe 30 seconds, then went back downstairs. "She's still sleeping," he told Mark. "I'll let her rest a bit longer." Dinner was served at 6. I listened to them eating the meal I'd prepared, talking and laughing while I sat in the darkness above them, recording everything on my phone. Around 7, Mark took the boys outside to shoot some baskets in the driveway we'd installed for Jennifer years ago. The moment they were gone, Denise and Richard were back in the kitchen. I started recording. "Did you talk to your lawyer this week?" Denise asked. "Yes. He thinks if I can document some financial separation before filing, it'll help. Maybe open a separate account, move some assets." "Isn't that illegal?" "Not if I'm careful. Margaret doesn't pay attention to our finances anyway. She never has. As long as there's money in the checking account for groceries, she doesn't ask questions." That was true, and I hated that it was true. I'd trusted him completely with our financial life. He handled investments, retirement planning, everything. I'd thought it was because he was better at it, because it was his job. Now I realized it was because he wanted control. "What about the house?" Denise asked. "That's trickier. It's worth about $800,000 now. If we sell, she gets half. But if I can convince her to let me buy her out, maybe offer her $400,000 and she can get a condo somewhere, we could keep it." "You think she'd agree to that?" "Margaret's not a fighter. She's passive. She'll take whatever seems fair and won't push back." Passive. He thought I was passive. I'd spent 40 years teaching teenagers, managing classroom discipline, standing up to administrators about curriculum, but to him, I was passive. They talked for another 10 minutes. Details about their affair, about the hotel they met at, about plans for a trip to Hawaii once this was all handled. Every word was captured on my phone. Finally, Mark and the boys came back inside. "I heard Richard suggest they all have pie and coffee, normal family time, as if half the people in that room weren't betraying the other half." I waited until 8 o'clock. By then, the worst of my shaking had stopped. The shock had crystallized into something harder, sharper. I had my evidence, I had my recordings, and I had a plan. I climbed down from the attic as quietly as I'd gone up, went into our bedroom, and got into bed fully clothed. Then I waited another 10 minutes before walking downstairs. They were all in the living room now. Richard looked up when I appeared. "Margaret! You're awake! How are you feeling?" I touched my temple, gave a weak smile. "Better, I think. I'm sorry I missed dinner." "Don't apologize," Mark said warmly. "We saved you some turkey." Denise wouldn't meet my eyes. I played the part perfectly. Apologetic, slightly embarrassed, grateful for their understanding. I ate a plate of cold turkey and stuffing while they filled me in on what I'd missed. The whole time, I was watching them. Richard, so concerned and attentive. Denise, pretending to be the caring sister-in-law. Both of them sitting in my living room, eating my food, lying to my face. They left around 9:30, hugs at the door, promises to do this again soon. Mark thanked me for hosting. Denise squeezed my hand and told me to take care of myself. The moment their car pulled away, Richard turned to me with a smile. "Well, that went well, despite your migraine. I think they had a good time." "I'm sure they did." He moved to put his arm around me, but I stepped away, pretending I needed to clear the remaining dishes. "You must be exhausted," he said. "Why don't you head to bed? I'll clean up." "That's okay. I slept all afternoon, remember?" For the first time, something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, maybe, but it was gone in a second. That night, I lay in bed next to him, wide awake, while he slept soundly. The man I'd loved for nearly 4 decades, snoring gently beside me, dreaming of his future with another woman. The next morning, I told Richard I was going to visit my sister in Seattle for a few days. I needed a break after the holiday, I said. Some sister time. He seemed relieved, probably thinking it gave him more time to plan with Denise. Instead, I drove to downtown Portland and walked into the office of Catherine Winters, a divorce attorney I'd found online. She had excellent reviews and a reputation for being fierce. Catherine was in her 40s, sharply dressed, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I sat in her leather chair and played her the recordings from Thanksgiving. When they finished, she sat back and exhaled slowly. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm not going to lie. These recordings are explosive, but I need to ask, how did you obtain them?" "I recorded them in my own home. I was in my attic. They were in my kitchen. Is that legal?" She nodded. Oregon is a one-party consent state, which means as long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's legal. Since you were present, even if hidden, these recordings are admissible. "What do I do?" Catherine leaned forward. "First, we secure your assets. Today, right now, you're going to open your own bank account at a different bank. Then we're going to go through every financial record you have access to and document everything before he has a chance to hide anything." We spent the next week doing exactly that. I'd kept copies of our tax returns, investment statements, everything. Richard had been meticulous with paperwork, which now worked against him. Catherine brought in a forensic accountant who found several irregularities, accounts Richard had opened in his name only, money that had been quietly moved over the past 6 months. He was already setting up, Catherine explained. "Getting ready to divorce you while protecting as much of the assets as possible, but because we caught it early, we can challenge all of these transfers." On December 3rd, I filed for divorce. Richard came home from work to find me sitting at the kitchen table with Catherine and her paralegal. His face went white. "Margaret, what's going on?" "Sit down, Richard." He sat, looking between us with growing panic. "I'm filing for divorce," I said calmly. "I know about your affair with Denise. I know about your plans to leave me after hiding assets. I know everything. What are you talking about?" "I'm not—" I pulled out my phone and played the first recording. His own voice filled the kitchen. "Margaret doesn't pay attention to our finances anyway. She never has." I stopped it there. His face had gone from white to gray. "I have hours of recordings from Thanksgiving," I said. "You and Denise, planning your future, discussing how to minimize what I'd get in the divorce. Every word is documented." Catherine spoke up. "Mr. Harrison, my name is Catherine Winters, and I'm representing your wife. I strongly suggest you retain your own attorney. We'll be filing these recordings with the court, along with evidence of financial misconduct. Oregon is a no-fault divorce state, but the recordings will be very relevant when we discuss asset division and whether you committed financial fraud." Richard tried to talk to me, tried to explain, tried to apologize. I listened to none of it. I'd heard everything I needed to hear in that attic. The next months were brutal. Richard hired an expensive attorney who tried every tactic to suppress the recordings, to argue they were illegally obtained, to paint me as vindictive. But Catherine was better. Mark filed for divorce from Denise 2 weeks after I filed against Richard. He'd been devastated when I'd called him, played him the same recordings. His marriage imploded just as spectacularly as mine. The court proceedings revealed everything. The forensic accountant testified about the hidden accounts. Catherine presented evidence of Richard's affair and his deliberate attempt to defraud me in the divorce. The judge was not sympathetic. In the end, I got 60% of our assets instead of 50%. The judge ruled that Richard's attempt to hide money constituted financial misconduct. I got to keep the house fully paid off. He was required to split his retirement accounts with me, plus pay a substantial settlement for the emotional distress and deception. It wasn't about the money, though. It was about justice. About not being passive. About showing him and Denise that you don't get to betray someone for years and then walk away unscathed. The divorce was finalized in June 2020. By then, the pandemic had started, which added surreal layers to everything. Richard moved to Seattle, where Denise was living in a small apartment after her own divorce. I heard through Jennifer that they moved in together. Part of me hoped they'd be happy, just to prove that all the destruction had some purpose. But mostly, I didn't think about them at all. I stayed in Portland, in the house I'd made a home. Jennifer visited when she could, always apologizing for not being there that Thanksgiving. I told her the truth. If she had been there, I might never have had my silly idea to hide in the attic. I might have gone on for years, oblivious, while Richard planned his exit strategy. My daughter thought that prank idea was the smartest thing I'd ever done, even if I'd never intended it to uncover the truth. The house felt empty at first. 38 years of marriage doesn't just disappear, but I filled it with new things. I started teaching a creative writing class at the community center. I adopted a rescue dog, a golden retriever named Cooper. I reconnected with old friends from my teaching days, women I'd lost touch with while being Mrs. Richard Harrison. About a year after the divorce was finalized, I was at a coffee shop downtown when a man around my age approached my table. "Excuse me, but aren't you Margaret Harrison? I think you taught my daughter English about 15 years ago. Ashley Monroe?" I remembered Ashley. Bright girl, loved poetry. Went on to study literature at Reed College. "Yes. How is Ashley?" "She's wonderful. Living in New York, working as an editor." He smiled. "I'm Robert, her father. Would you mind if I joined you? Ashley always said you were her favorite teacher, and I'd love to hear about what you're up to these days." Robert was a widower. His wife had passed away from cancer 3 years earlier. He was a retired architect who now volunteered with Habitat for Humanity. We talked for 2 hours that day and exchanged numbers before parting ways. We took things slow. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates, which turned into weekend trips to the coast. Robert knew about my divorce, the whole story. I'd been open about it, not ashamed. He understood betrayal, having watched his wife suffer through her illness. We both knew about loss, about rebuilding. On Thanksgiving 2021, 2 years after that fateful day in the attic, Robert and I hosted dinner together at my house. Jennifer and her family flew in from Boston. Robert's 3 adult children came with their families. The house was full of noise and laughter and life. At one point, I stood in my kitchen, looking out at everyone gathered in the living room, and Jennifer came up beside me. "You happy, Mom?" I thought about it. About the journey from that Thanksgiving where my world shattered, through the pain and anger and courtroom battles, to this moment, to this full, chaotic, imperfect, beautiful moment. "Yeah," I said. "I really am." "That prank probably saved your life," Jennifer said quietly. "It wasn't the prank," I replied. "It was choosing not to be passive. It was choosing to fight for myself, to demand better. The attic just showed me what I needed to see." Later that evening, after everyone had eaten too much pie and the grandchildren were drowsy on the couch, Robert found me alone in the kitchen, doing dishes. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, picking up a towel to dry. I looked around my kitchen. 2 years ago, Richard and Denise had stood in this exact spot, plotting their future and my diminishment. Now it was filled with warmth and honesty and the kind of love that doesn't require hiding. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am," I told Robert. "Not for what happened exactly, but for finding out when I did, for having the chance to build something real." He kissed my temple. That migraine excuse was the luckiest unlucky thing that ever happened. I laughed. "Something like that? Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't had that silly idea to hide in the attic. If I just hosted Thanksgiving normally, smiled through the day, never knowing what was being said when I left the room. Richard would have left me anyway, probably that following January, just like he'd planned. But I would have been blindsided, unprepared, vulnerable. Instead, I'd had time to prepare, to secure my future, to gather evidence, to make sure that when he walked away, he didn't get to take everything with him. People ask me sometimes if I regret wasting 38 years with Richard. I don't see it that way. Those years gave me Jennifer. They taught me what I don't want in a relationship. And ultimately, they led me here, to this moment, to this life I've built from the ashes of that old one. The truth found me in an attic on Thanksgiving Day. But what I did with that truth, that was my choice. And I chose to fight. I chose to stand up. I chose to not be the passive person Richard thought I was. That's not a waste. That's survival. That's victory. That's coming out the other side stronger than you went in. And every Thanksgiving now, when I'm carving the turkey or setting the table or welcoming guests into my home, I remember that cold afternoon in the attic, listening to my world fall apart. I remember the fear and shock and rage. But mostly, I remember the moment I decided to stop hiding and start fighting back. That's the real story, not the betrayal. But what came after? The choice to rebuild. The courage to start over at 62. The discovery that it's never too late to demand the life you deserve. And if that all started with a silly prank idea and a dusty attic, well, I'll take it, because from where I'm standing now, it was worth every difficult step of the journey.